They called her an illiterate old black woman during the heated school board meeting, their voices dripping with condescension as they dismissed her concerns about the proposed budget cuts that would eliminate language programs and reduce library hours. What the assembled parents, teachers, and administrators could never have imagined was that the 76-year-old woman they were mocking for her simple questions was Dr. Esperanza Williams, a retired linguistics professor who spoke 9 languages fluently, held 3 doctoral degrees, and had quietly donated over $12 million to save Riverside Elementary School from closure just 2 years earlier. The assumptions about Dr. Williams had begun the moment she entered the packed auditorium of Riverside Elementary, wearing a simple cardigan and carrying a worn leather notebook that contained observations written in 4 different languages about educational policy and community needs. Her modest appearance and soft-spoken manner had immediately triggered responses from audience members who processed her presence through filters of age, race, and class that prevented them from considering the possibility that she might possess expertise relevant to the discussion at hand. The meeting had been called to address the school district's financial crisis and the proposed elimination of programs that served the diverse student population of Riverside Elementary, where 67% of children qualified for free or reduced lunch and 43% were English language learners from families who had immigrated from 12 different countries. Dr. Williams had attended because she understood better than anyone in the room the importance of maintaining language support services and culturally responsive educational programming for children whose academic success depended on such resources. When Dr. Williams raised her hand to ask about the impact of proposed cuts on the ESL program, her question was met with barely concealed impatience from board chair Margaret Foster, a real estate attorney whose own children attended the district's affluent magnet school across town. Mrs. Foster's response carried the particular tone reserved for addressing community members who were assumed to lack the sophistication necessary for meaningful participation in educational policy discussions. "Ma'am," Mrs. Foster said, her voice carrying practiced condescension, "I understand your concerns, but these budget decisions require understanding of complex financial and pedagogical considerations that may be difficult for someone in your situation to fully grasp. Perhaps you could speak with one of our community liaisons after the meeting if you have specific questions about services." The dismissal was swift and complete, reflecting assumptions about Dr. Williams' educational background and intellectual capacity that had been formed within seconds of her appearance at the microphone. Mrs. Foster's suggestion that Dr. Williams speak with community liaisons rather than participating directly in policy discussions revealed the automatic categorization that had reduced a brilliant scholar to someone who needed simplified explanations and indirect access to decision-making processes. What made the dismissal particularly ironic was that Dr. Williams had spent 38 years as a professor of applied linguistics at the State University, specializing in multilingual education and language acquisition in diverse communities. Her doctoral dissertation on code switching in bilingual children had been published in 6 languages and was considered foundational research in the field. Her expertise in educational policy and linguistic development was precisely what the school board needed to understand the full implications of their proposed budget cuts. Dr. Williams' fluency in 9 languages, English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian, German, Mandarin, Arabic, and Russian, had been developed through decades of academic study, international research, and community work with immigrant families whose children attended schools like Riverside Elementary. Her linguistic abilities weren't merely academic achievements, but practical tools that had allowed her to serve as translator, advocate, and educational consultant for hundreds of families navigating American school systems while maintaining their cultural and linguistic heritage. The notebook she carried contained detailed analysis of Riverside Elementary's demographics, academic performance data, and research-based recommendations for supporting multilingual learners, analysis that she had prepared after months of observing classes, interviewing teachers, and studying the educational outcomes that resulted from various approaches to language instruction and cultural inclusion. Her simple questions were actually sophisticated inquiries designed to expose the flawed assumptions underlying the proposed budget cuts. Parent Jennifer Martinez, whose 8-year-old daughter participated in the dual language program that was slated for elimination, had been watching Dr. Williams with growing recognition. As a translator for the county court system, Jennifer had encountered Dr. Williams several times when her expertise had been needed for complex cases involving multilingual families, and she understood that the woman being dismissed by the school board was actually one of the region's most respected experts in exactly the areas under discussion. "Excuse me," Jennifer interrupted, rising from her seat in the middle of the auditorium, "but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Dr. Williams is a retired linguistics professor who specializes in multilingual education. She's probably more qualified to discuss these budget cuts than anyone else in this room." Jennifer's intervention created a moment of uncomfortable silence as board members and audience members began to reconsider their assumptions about Dr. Williams's qualifications and purpose at the meeting. The revelation that the woman they had been dismissing as uninformed was actually an expert in the field under discussion forced a re-evaluation of both their automatic judgments and their approach to community input. Mrs. Foster's expression shifted from confident dismissal to uncertainty as she processed Jennifer's information and began to understand that her condescending treatment of Dr. Williams might have been not just rude, but professionally embarrassing. The possibility that she had just publicly dismissed a recognized expert in educational linguistics created the kind of social and professional discomfort that revealed the dangers of making assumptions based on appearance rather than listening to actual contributions. Dr. Williams remained at the microphone, her dignity intact despite the dismissive treatment she had received, ready to share insights that could help the school board understand the educational and community implications of their proposed cuts. Her presence represented not just individual expertise, but also the broader pattern of community wisdom and resources that were often overlooked when decision-makers operated from narrow assumptions about who possessed valuable knowledge and perspectives. The tension in the auditorium was palpable as the meeting balanced on the edge of either meaningful dialogue or continued dismissal, with Dr. Williams representing the possibility that community members might have more to contribute to educational policy discussions than had been previously recognized or respected by those in positions of formal authority. As the uncomfortable silence stretched across the auditorium, Dr. Williams opened her worn leather notebook and began to speak in the measured, authoritative tone that had commanded respect in university lecture halls for nearly 4 decades. Her response to the dismissive treatment would demonstrate not only her linguistic expertise, but also the depth of research and analysis she had brought to understanding Riverside Elementary's specific challenges and opportunities. "Mrs. Foster," Dr. Williams began, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to addressing complex educational issues, "I appreciate your concern about the complexity of these budget decisions. Perhaps I can offer some perspective that might be helpful. I've been observing classes at Riverside Elementary for the past 18 months, and I've documented significant correlations between the dual language program and improved academic outcomes for both English learners and native English speakers." She continued speaking but seamlessly shifted into fluent Spanish to address the Latino parents in the audience. "Parents, I understand your concerns about the bilingual program. Research clearly shows that students who maintain their native language while learning English have better long-term academic performance." Then, switching to Mandarin for the Chinese immigrant families, she explained how dual language education was crucial for their children's academic success and that eliminating these programs would negatively impact their futures. The transformation in the auditorium was immediate and profound. Parents who had been sitting silently, struggling to follow the English-only proceedings, suddenly heard their concerns being addressed in their native languages by someone who clearly understood both the educational research and their personal experiences. The board members, who had been operating under the assumption that Dr. Williams lacked the sophistication to participate meaningfully in policy discussions, found themselves witnessing a demonstration of linguistic and intellectual abilities that exceeded those of anyone else in the room. Dr. Williams continued her multilingual address, switching effortlessly to Arabic for the refugee families from Somalia and Syria, explaining that she understood their children faced special challenges in the educational system and that language programs were essential for their academic and social success. Her fluency wasn't merely academic. It carried the cultural understanding and emotional resonance that came from years of working directly with immigrant families and understanding their educational needs and experiences. Board member Dr. Patricia Chen, herself a former educator who had been uncomfortable with Mrs. Foster's dismissive treatment of community input, leaned forward with obvious interest. Dr. Williams, could you share more about your research findings regarding the dual language program? It sounds like you have data that could inform our decision-making process. The request for Dr. Williams' research marked a turning point in the meeting, shifting from dismissal of community input to recognition that valuable expertise existed outside the formal channels typically consulted for educational policy decisions. Dr. Williams' notebook contained 18 months of systematic observation, student outcome analysis, and comparative research that the school board had never accessed, despite making decisions that would affect the very programs and students she had been studying. Certainly, Dr. Williams replied, returning to English while maintaining the authoritative tone that had characterized her academic presentations for decades. My research at Riverside Elementary has focused on the cognitive and academic benefits of maintaining heritage languages while acquiring English proficiency. The data clearly demonstrates that students in the dual language program outperform their peers in monolingual English programs on standardized assessments, demonstrate superior problem-solving abilities, and show higher levels of cultural competence and global awareness. What the board members were beginning to understand was that Dr. Williams' presence at the meeting wasn't that of a concerned community member seeking information, but rather that of a recognized expert offering to share research that could prevent them from making educationally and financially counterproductive decisions. Her analysis had revealed that eliminating language programs would not only harm students academically, but would also reduce the school's appeal to families seeking quality multilingual education, potentially leading to further enrollment declines and budget challenges. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. The revelation of Dr. Williams' credentials had begun to spread through the audience via whispered conversations and text messages, with parents and teachers sharing information about her background and expressing amazement that such expertise had been present in their community without their knowledge. Several teachers recognized her name from academic publications they had encountered during their graduate studies, and the realization that a distinguished scholar had been observing their classrooms and supporting their work was both humbling and validating. Mrs. Foster's discomfort was becoming increasingly visible as she realized the magnitude of her mistake in dismissing Dr. Williams. The possibility that footage of her condescending treatment of a respected academic would circulate on social media or be reported in local news coverage of the meeting created professional concerns that extended beyond simple embarrassment. Her attempt to limit community input had instead created a situation where her own competence and judgment were being questioned. Dr. Williams demonstrated her linguistic abilities further by switching to French to address families from Haiti and West Africa, then to Portuguese for the Brazilian families, and German for the few European immigrant families present. Each transition was effortless and culturally appropriate, showing not just vocabulary knowledge, but deep understanding of the educational concerns specific to each community's experience in American schools. Dr. Williams had not yet revealed the full extent of her connection to Riverside Elementary, choosing to focus first on her academic credentials and research findings before disclosing the financial support she had been providing to keep the school operational. The $12 million she had donated over the past 2 years had prevented the school's closure and had funded many of the programs that were now being considered for elimination due to budget constraints that her contributions had actually been addressing. The donations had been structured through a complex network of foundations and educational trusts that disguised Dr. Williams' identity, while ensuring that Riverside Elementary received the resources necessary to serve its diverse student population effectively. Her philanthropy had been guided by the same research that had informed her academic work, understanding that educational success for multilingual learners required comprehensive support systems that included language instruction, cultural programming, and family engagement services. As Dr. Williams continued to present her research findings, parents in the audience began to understand that they were witnessing not just an expert presentation, but a passionate advocacy for their children's educational needs by someone who had invested years of study and significant personal resources in ensuring that those needs were met. The woman who had been dismissed as illiterate was revealing herself to be not only intellectually accomplished, but also deeply committed to the educational success of the very community that some board members had assumed she couldn't understand or meaningfully serve. The moment of full revelation came when Dr. Williams calmly reached into her leather notebook and retrieved a folder containing documents that would transform the entire school board meeting from a budget discussion into a confrontation with their own assumptions and prejudices. The papers she held represented not just her academic credentials, but also the financial documentation that would expose the depth of her investment in Riverside Elementary's survival and success. "Mrs. Foster," Dr. Williams said, her voice maintaining the same measured tone despite the obvious tension in the room, "before we continue discussing budget cuts, I think the board should understand the full context of Riverside Elementary's financial situation. Over the past 2 years, I have personally donated $12.7 million to prevent this school's closure and to fund the programs you're now proposing to eliminate." The silence that followed was deafening. Board members sat frozen, processing information that completely undermined their assumptions about both Dr. Williams's qualifications and their understanding of the school's financial circumstances. Mrs. Foster's face had gone pale as she realized that she had just condescendingly dismissed the woman who had been single-handedly keeping their school operational. Dr. Williams continued, spreading the financial documentation across the podium with the same methodical precision she had once used in academic presentations. "The dual language program that serves 43% of your students has been funded entirely through the Williams Educational Foundation, which I established specifically to support multilingual education in underserved communities. The library renovation, the technology upgrades, the after-school programming, and the teacher retention bonuses that have kept your most experienced educators from leaving for better-paying districts, all of these improvements have been funded through my personal wealth." Parent after parent in the audience began to connect Dr. Williams's revelation with improvements they had noticed at the school over the past 2 years. The new computers in the language lab, the expanded library hours, the additional counseling services for refugee families, the translator services at parent-teacher conferences, all of it had been attributed to successful grant applications and district funding reallocations, but had actually been the result of Dr. Williams's strategic philanthropy. Teacher Maria Santos, who taught 3rd grade in the dual language program, rose from her seat with obvious emotion. "Dr. Williams, you're the reason we were able to purchase the culturally responsive curriculum materials that have made such a difference for our students. You're why we have been able to offer professional development in trauma-informed teaching for children from refugee families. We thought all of that support was coming from the district office." The revelation was creating a ripple effect of recognition throughout the auditorium, as community members began to understand that Dr. Williams had been the anonymous benefactor behind numerous improvements and services that had transformed their children's educational experience. Her giving had been so carefully coordinated through intermediary organizations that neither teachers, parents, nor even most school administrators had known the source of their enhanced resources. Dr. Williams' approach to philanthropy reflected the same principles that had guided her academic career: careful research, strategic implementation, and focus on measurable outcomes rather than personal recognition. She had spent months studying Riverside Elementary's specific needs, before beginning her donations, ensuring that her financial support would address root causes rather than merely symptoms of educational inequity. Board member, Dr. Patricia Chen was the first to find her voice after the financial revelation. Dr. Williams, I'm struggling to understand how the board was never informed about donations of this magnitude. Our financial records should reflect any contributions above a certain threshold, and $12 million certainly qualifies as significant funding that should have been disclosed to the governance body. The donations were structured through a network of educational foundations and non-profit organizations to maintain anonymity while ensuring full legal compliance, Dr. Williams explained. Every dollar was properly documented and reported, but the reporting listed the intermediary foundations as the source rather than my personal name. I specifically requested anonymity because I wanted the focus to remain on educational outcomes rather than donor recognition. Mrs. Foster was beginning to understand that her treatment of Dr. Williams would likely have professional consequences beyond the immediate embarrassment of the meeting. The video footage of her dismissing a major donor and educational expert was already being shared on social media by parents and teachers who were documenting what they viewed as an example of institutional racism and administrative incompetence. The financial documentation that Dr. Williams presented revealed not just the magnitude of her giving, but also the sophistication of her understanding of educational funding and policy. Her donations had been targeted specifically at programs and services that research indicated would have the greatest impact on student outcomes, particularly for English language learners and children from low-income families. The programs you're proposing to eliminate, Dr. Williams continued, represent investments that have already demonstrated measurable improvements in student achievement, family engagement, and teacher satisfaction. Cutting these programs would not just harm current students, it would waste 2 years of strategic investment in educational excellence and community building. She pulled out charts and graphs that showed student progress data, attendance improvements, and standardized test score increases that correlated directly with the programs funded through her philanthropy. The presentation was not just an emotional plea for maintaining services, but a data-driven argument for the educational and fiscal benefits of continuing the investments she had been making. Principal Janet Rodriguez, who had been sitting in the front row throughout the meeting, stood up with obvious distress. Dr. Williams, I had no idea that our anonymous benefactor was sitting in our community meetings all this time. The foundation representatives told us you preferred to remain completely anonymous, so we never questioned their instructions to keep your identity confidential, even from school administration. The principal's comments revealed another layer of Dr. Williams' thoughtful approach to giving. She had not just provided money, but had also continued to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of her investments through direct observation and community engagement. Her presence at school board meetings wasn't that of a typical concerned parent or community member, but of someone with both expertise and financial investment in the outcomes being discussed. As the full scope of Dr. Williams' involvement became clear, the proposed budget cuts began to seem not just educationally questionable, but financially absurd. The board was proposing to eliminate programs that had been privately funded and had demonstrated measurable success, potentially losing both the educational benefits and the ongoing philanthropic support that had made those benefits possible. 15 months after the school board meeting that had transformed both Riverside Elementary and the broader community's understanding of expertise and prejudice, Dr. Esperanza Williams stood before a packed auditorium at the university where she had spent her academic career, delivering the keynote address at the annual conference on multilingual education. The invitation to speak had come not just because of her scholarly contributions, but because of the way her confrontation with assumptions about race, age, and intelligence had become a powerful teaching tool for educators across the country. The Riverside Elementary transformation had become a case study in how community expertise and philanthropic investment could revitalize struggling schools when combined with respect for diverse knowledge and inclusive decision-making processes. The programs that the school board had once proposed to eliminate were now being replicated in school districts nationwide, with Dr. Williams serving as a consultant for communities seeking to implement similar multilingual education and family engagement initiatives. Mrs. Margaret Foster had resigned from the school board 3 months after the meeting, citing personal reasons, though everyone understood that the viral video of her dismissive treatment of Dr. Williams had made her position untenable. The footage had been viewed over 2 million times and had become a powerful example of how unconscious bias could lead to professionally and morally embarrassing situations when people made assumptions based on appearance rather than listening to actual contributions. Dr. Williams had handled Mrs. Foster's situation with the same grace she had shown during the original confrontation, declining to comment publicly on calls for Foster's resignation and instead focusing on the positive changes that had emerged from their difficult encounter. Her response had demonstrated the kind of educational leadership that emphasized growth and learning over punishment and shame. The Williams Educational Foundation had expanded significantly since the school board revelation, receiving donations from individuals and organizations inspired by Dr. Williams's example of strategic, research-based philanthropy. The foundation now supported multilingual education programs in 12 states and had become a model for how private philanthropy could supplement public education funding while maintaining democratic accountability and community input. Riverside Elementary had become one of the most successful schools in the district, with waiting lists for enrollment, as families specifically sought out the multilingual programs and culturally responsive teaching that Dr. Williams's support had made possible. The school's success had attracted additional funding from the district and state, creating a sustainable financial model that no longer depended entirely on Dr. Williams's personal contributions. The teaching staff had grown from 18 to 32 educators, with the school serving as a training site for teachers seeking certification in multilingual education and culturally responsive pedagogy. Dr. Williams had established a teacher fellowship program that provided ongoing professional development and competitive salaries that had made Riverside Elementary a destination for the region's most talented educators. Student outcomes at Riverside Elementary had improved dramatically across all demographic groups, with English language learners showing particularly impressive gains in both academic achievement and social-emotional development. The school's approach to honoring and building upon students' heritage languages while developing English proficiency had become a model that other districts were studying and attempting to replicate. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. Dr. Williams' keynote address focused on what she called the pedagogy of assumptions, the ways that educational institutions and communities often failed to recognize and utilize the expertise and resources that existed within their own populations. Her experience at the school board meeting had become a central example of how prejudice and limited thinking could prevent communities from accessing the knowledge and support they needed to serve their children effectively. When we assume we know who has knowledge and who doesn't based on appearance, age, race, or social class, Dr. Williams told the conference audience, we cut ourselves off from exactly the expertise and resources we need to solve our most challenging problems. The assumption that I was illiterate prevented the school board from accessing both my academic knowledge and my financial resources for months, potentially harming the very students they were trying to serve. The conference presentation included video testimonials from Riverside Elementary students, parents, and teachers, describing how the multilingual programs and culturally responsive teaching had transformed their educational experience. Students spoke fluently in multiple languages about their academic goals and cultural pride, demonstrating exactly the kind of global competence that Dr. Williams' research had predicted would result from high-quality bilingual education. Parent testimonials revealed the broader community impact of Dr. Williams' approach to educational philanthropy. Families described feeling valued and respected in ways they had never experienced in previous school settings, with their languages and cultures being treated as assets rather than obstacles to their children's success. The school had become a community hub where families from different cultural backgrounds connected with each other and worked together to support all children's learning. The ripple effects of Dr. Williams' confrontation with the school board had extended far beyond education policy. The incident had sparked community conversations about unconscious bias, the importance of diverse voices in decision-making, and the need to examine assumptions about who possessed valuable knowledge and resources. Local businesses and organizations had begun implementing training programs focused on recognizing and challenging their own biases about expertise and authority. Dr. Williams had been invited to serve on numerous boards and advisory committees, but she had chosen to limit her formal commitments to focus on the hands-on work of supporting multilingual education and immigrant families. Her approach to community service remained grounded in the same principles that had guided her philanthropy: direct engagement with the people and communities being served, careful research to understand real needs, and strategic investment in sustainable solutions. As she concluded her keynote address, Dr. Williams reflected on the irony that had started her journey from anonymous philanthropist to public advocate. "The people who called me illiterate gave me the opportunity to demonstrate not just my linguistic abilities, but also the importance of listening to community voices and recognizing that expertise comes in many forms. Their assumptions about me revealed their own limitations, but more importantly, they created space for all of us to learn and grow." The standing ovation that followed her presentation was not just recognition of her academic achievements or philanthropic generosity, but appreciation for the way she had transformed a moment of prejudice and dismissal into an opportunity for education, growth, and positive change that had benefited an entire community and inspired educators worldwide. The woman who had been called illiterate had not only demonstrated her mastery of 9 languages and her expertise in educational policy, but had also taught a powerful lesson about the importance of recognizing and respecting the knowledge, wisdom, and resources that exist within every community, regardless of how they might initially appear to those in positions of formal authority.